We are live. Well, welcome everyone to another episode of the Scriptural Mormonism podcast. I'm your host, Robert Baldwin. Today we were actually joined by not one, but two guests and friends of mine, Sarah Allen and David Snell. And we will be discussing how normies, and I don't use that in a derogatory term, I just like, we'll explain that maybe term later, but how normies can engage in meaningful scriptural, historical, doctrinal research. And I think this would be very good because, like, all Latter-day Saints are called to give a reasoned defense, a la 1 Peter 3:15, the text that uses apologia in the Greek, where we get apologetics. But even section 71, where Joseph and Sidney in the church is told, like, to meet the enemies and to confront them with your reasoned defenses and so forth. So I thought this would be like very beneficial for, like, say, people who don't necessarily have like formal training, say theology or Hebrew or whatever, because like both these guys have done excellent work without, like, say, necessarily having, like, say, the seminary training on defending and explicating like Latter-day Saint doctrine and theology, as well as discussing the very balanced way difficult gospel issues. So they'll also be fun. So as usual, like because this is the first time both of you have been actually on the podcast, what I'll do is, like, before we're going to go into the topic proper, how about beginning with Sarah and then afterwards David? You kind of give an introduction to yourself. Like, have you always been a Latter-day Saint? What's your educational background? What got you interested in, like, say, during doing apologetics and research into like these topics, and whatever else, like projects you worked on and are working on and so forth?
All right. Well, yeah, I was born and raised in the church. My family ancestry on both sides of my family goes back to about 1831 or so. So right at the beginning. I studied history and journalism in college. The reason I got into all of this, I started feeling very strongly that I needed to live up to my covenant for the law of consecration, because I wasn't really doing that as much. And I felt very strongly that I needed to start taking action on that. So I started off on Reddit, which is a dumpster fire for those of you who are aware of that. But I found a couple of subreddits that were good, and I kind of carved out a little niche there and made some friends and everything. Started responding to the CES letter because of a prompting from my father telling me to, and I didn't want to, and he insisted, so I did. And then one of my friends on Reddit happens to be well connected at FAIR, and I will not dox him, but he is a longtime volunteer with them. So he took my responses to the president of FAIR, Scott Gordon, behind my back. I was not aware he was doing that, and Scott liked them and wanted to repost them on the FAIR blog. So in order to do that, I had to dox myself, which is never fun. I like being anonymous, and I'm not anymore, so that was an adjustment. But yeah, that's how I got into all of this. Through that, it led to a job at Scripture Central, which is where I work now. I'm in my office right now at the moment. I'm on the research team there. And I help out with Evidence Central. And for upcoming projects, there is a virtual fair conference this weekend, which I am presenting around 11 or so, I think, 11:30 in the morning on Saturday. We'll be talking about all of the other prominent people in the Restoration who also had visions in addition to Joseph Smith.
Cool. Well, I'm glad you gave that introduction, Sarah, because we haven't been able to talk very much.
I know.
And so I'm glad to be able to spend some time here with you and hear a little bit more of your story as well. Yeah, I'm David Snell. I didn't know we were live streaming this. I'm so used to recording something and then having it edited, and then you look at a draft and you're like, okay, this is good, let's send it through and then post it. But now I have to be careful. I can't just say anything. But so I was born in Salt Lake, raised the early years of my life in California, Then when I was 6 or 7, we moved to Oregon, Northeast Oregon, in the desert. And I spent most of my childhood there. Well, all of my childhood there. Served a mission in Chihuahua, Mexico, and then came to BYU, where I studied journalism, communications with an emphasis in journalism, specifically broadcast journalism, and got married to a wonderful woman. We've got a couple of kids now, still in Provo. I got connected with Saints Unscripted, and they've been around for a long time. We've been around for a long time. I became a host. I wasn't one of the original hosts, but I came on, I think, in 2018-ish. And so Saints Unscripted, back then it was called Three Mormons, and we've since changed it to Saints Unscripted, and it's unscripted. And what we learned is that it's really hard for like three college age kids that don't have degrees in history and whatnot. It's really hard for them to speak about tough, historical issues or tough church topics without looking like idiots. And so we had this idea to do these shorter little scripted videos about controversial history, questions that people had. And they were like, "Hey, David, let's have you be the host of this." And I thought, I was a returned missionary. I was like, "Okay, I got this." Like, not much is going to be new here. And that was when I was first exposed to, the world of apologetics and just like controversial questions in general. Um, and so it was, out of the frying pan and into the fire for a long time. And as we've mentioned, I don't have any formal scholarly training in this stuff, which is an advantage in some ways and a disadvantage in others. Um, but so it was, it took a while to just figure out what kind of tools were in my toolbox, what resources I had available to me, working through issue by issue, and I've been doing that for almost 6 years. And then just a few months ago, that segment of Saints Unscripted that I was helping to produce split off and became its own channel, which is called Keystone. If you search Keystone LDS or Keystone David Snell or something like that on YouTube, it'll pop up for you. And so I still do kind of those similar monologue videos, short monologue videos about different topics, historical topics there, in addition to more scholarly interviews and things like that. And so we're getting we've been going for a few months now, and it's been a lot of fun. But yeah, that's a little bit about me.
Oh no, that's good. And I've linked some of your guys' stuff in the show notes, like your video series that was on Skins Unscripted, as well as your new YouTube channel, and the link to Sarah's blog post on the fair, where you can come across like her very lengthy responses to things such as a CES letter, which I think kind of made you famous / infamous in many respects here, Sarah. Depending on the person you talk to. But because you've both been to like say the school of hard knocks, if you will, like say learning what works and what does not work. I don't like I just like let the two of you guys kibitz about a bit about like what have you learned, like what tools are very important for people to learn, what are the tips, like if you were to go back to your younger selves when you started doing this, like back in 2018 for yourself, David, or back when you started doing your Reddit responses there, like what advice would you give to people or your younger selves as well, and so forth? And I'll let you kind of discuss that, so.
Go ahead, Sarah.
All right. Well, so what I have found that works really well, first of all, is you need to play to your own strengths and not try to be somebody else, and not try to do more than is in your wheelhouse, because that does not ever go well. As far as tools go, there are some websites that are super important that you're going to want to bookmark, and Those are Scripture Central and Fair. The Saints Unscripted website is a great resource as well. B.H. Roberts, Interpreter Foundation. Those are pretty much like the main core of them. There are others, like you're going to want a free JSTOR account. You're going to want to check out archive.org. You know, you're going to want, like, you're going to have to read a lot. That's the thing. And I know people just don't have time for that, but you're going to have to read a lot. There is
or they can just watch my videos, get the 6-minute version.
Yeah, you could do that too.
No, just like on the whole, like you have to read. Unfortunately, in our generations, we're not really readers, you know, especially with the TikTok generation. So, you know, what tips? Because I know this like it's important. Like ultimately, like you have to read sources. You can't just like rely on say like a 10-second TikTok video, as patchy as it may be. So, do you think like there's like a role for like say time management and like just for making sure you kind of get into a habit, like very good study habits? You know, what tips would you have on that for both you guys? So
yeah. I've always been a reader, like I've always enjoyed that, but I know not everybody does. I have a little bit of ADHD, so like right now I'm playing with a fidget toy while we're talking. I find that fidgeting actually helps me concentrate better because I'm being active and I'm moving. So when I have a lot of stuff to read, I will do something that I can fidget with and play with while I'm reading to help me concentrate, which it does not work for everybody, I know, but that's something that helps me. Caffeine also helps.
Personally, I'm not much of a reader. And so that's been kind of a challenge for me because, yeah, sometimes there's a topic and it's like, okay, here's a book. And that's one thing that I would tell my younger self is that if you think that the only resources available to you are the scriptures, general conference talks, and whatever happens to be on the church's website and like the Liahona magazine, like if that's all you think that is available to you, you need to broaden your view. And that's what and like you can't blame anybody for being in that, you know, headspace because that's
yeah.
how many of us grew up. That's what I grew up with the Friend, the New Era, the Ensign magazine, the scriptures, general conference talks, and maybe, you know, whatever gospel principles manual or whatever Sunday school manual there was. But there's so much more, and it took me a little bit to realize that.
Me too.
Yeah. And all those sources that you mentioned, Sarah, are exactly the sources that I needed to discover as well, including, I don't know if you mentioned this, but BYU Studies, BYU
Yes.
Religious Educator. They have so much material
The
that,
Scholars Archive is great too.
yeah, yeah. And people just don't know about them unless you're already like part of that like scholarly community, I feel like.
Yeah, I remember way back when I first discovered that farms, which eventually morphed into both the Interpreter and here at Scripture Central. When I first discovered farms and fair, I was blown away that people actually did this stuff. Like I had no idea it was even a thing that like diving in and finding actual evidence to support the scriptures was like a real field. You know, I knew about the Bible scholarship, obviously, but I had no idea that Latter-day Saints were doing it too. And it just blew my mind. I was shocked.
Yeah, it reminds me of like, you know, when you're car shopping, right? And you get, you know, your Honda Civic or whatever, and then you start to notice, oh, there's a Honda Civic,
And
there's a
those are
Honda Civic,
everywhere.
they're
Yeah.
everywhere, but you don't notice, and they've always been there, but you don't notice until like
You
your
buy
your
one.
focus was on it or you bought one. And I feel like it's the
Mhm.
same way with all of this like scholarship. It's like it's been there, it's there, but unless you know where to look, unless it's on your radar, it's
Yeah.
so easy to miss it, which is such a bummer. And my videos are a starting point. I arrogantly say, oh, you can skip all the research and just go watch my videos, but they're a starting point, and I try to leave all the resources in the video descriptions if you want to dive deep. Which, if it's a a topic that is relevant to someone's concerns, dive deep, like go as deep as you
Yeah.
can and study as much as you can.
Yeah, I do the same thing with all of my posts on the FAIR blog. They all have all of the sources cited twice. They're all linked in the article, and then down below they're all listed again. And I tell people not to take my word for it or take the critic's word for it, but to dive in and do their own research and figure out for themselves, because we're all going to have different opinions about this, and what's convincing to me will not be convincing to you, and vice versa. So you have to dive in and you have to understand the issues.
Yeah. And I think that good people can look at the same evidence and come to different conclusions.
Absolutely.
So you might as well look at the evidence for yourself, come to your own conclusions about it. I think it's sometimes easier for it to be spoon-fed to us and for somebody to say, hey, here's what you should believe. That might be the easier path, but the problem is you've got people on all sides saying, trying to cram it down your throat. This is what you have to believe. This is what you have to believe. So it's so important to know what tools are in your toolbox to begin with so that you have resources when you have those questions. That's one of the big things for me. And thankfully, this was, doing this segment of Saints Unscripted and now Keystone. By the way, Saints Unscripted is still around, and I'm still a host on Saints Unscripted, and it's still great. Um, but but I was thankfully in an environment where I had a lot of supportive coworkers, supportive family. All my family members are members of the church. But that put me in a headspace where I wasn't so quick to panic when I learned about new things. And that is a big thing as well. I feel like a lot of critical material, whether intentionally or not, is designed to instill panic in you. It's designed to overwhelm you with negative arguments. So you go, holy cow, this is all new. I'm freaking out here. And then you throw the baby out with the bathwater. And it's so important to just take a deep breath, calm down, and understand that it's pretty darn likely that you have not come up with a question that is new. Like in all the years I've been doing this, I don't think I've found a question that no one has ever talked about before.
Me neither.
There are resources out there. You just got to know where to find them and what rocks to look under.
Yeah, absolutely. And like you were saying, learning about it from a neutral or a faith positive source, rather than learning about it from critical material and anti-Mormon stuff, is huge. I actually just talked about that at the fair conference in August, is inoculation and learning that stuff for yourself first and forming up your own opinions first before you dive into all of the horrible, awful stuff that's out there, because I mean, there's a ton of it out there. But if you hear it for yourself and you have time to digest it and you have time to think about it and work through it and figure out how that fits into your testimony, a lot of times it won't faze you.
What you said reminded me of another tip that has helped me. And this is, I think, a trap that people fall into when they don't have a lot of experience with research and whatnot. And that is that just because a specific source from history exists that is making a certain claim, that doesn't mean that it's true.
Yeah.
That doesn't mean it's reliable. Just because somebody said something about Joseph Smith in 1835, you can say, hey, it's history, right? Like this is a historic document. That doesn't mean it's true. It doesn't mean it's reliable. And I think it's our responsibility as just normies, I think, trying to do good research to widen the gaze, again, compare that source with other contemporary sources that might disagree with it or agree with it. We have to learn not only how to find the sources, but how to weigh them and analyze them as well. That's kind of the 1-2 punch of the research, is know where to look and then know how to judge, I guess you could say.
Okay, so do you want to talk about that a little bit? Like what
That's
I
okay with
do?
me.
Okay, what I do personally when I am weighing a source, sources that happen closer to the event in question are usually more reliable than the ones that are given like 50 years later. You know, when people have had time to have their memories get all worked through retelling and later events and stuff. Firsthand sources are generally more reliable than third or fourth or fifth hand sources. And a lot of those old sources that you were talking about, like in Mormonism Unveiled and all those old anti-Mormon books, are like, some guy told me this, or some person told this person who told this person who told me this. And you're like,
A gentleman in Palmyra.
yeah, yeah, some anonymous rando guy, and you're like, okay, okay, what authority does he have? Like, why would you trust that?
Yeah.
So, typically, you need to spot the bias because everybody has a bias. They'll pretend they don't, but they do. So you need to learn how to read that and kind of try and remove that as best as you can. I would look for peer-reviewed stuff if you're looking at recent stuff and not self-published. No offense to Robert, who's self-published a gazillion stuff, and no offense to you or me, because I mean we self-publish too, but typically peer-reviewed is better because it's gone through all that academic rigor. Journals are better than just some
Guy on Instagram.
Yeah, oh, absolutely, yeah, yeah. And a lot of those people on TikTok and YouTube and, you know, they don't have credentials, they don't really know what they're talking about. And, you know, experts are experts for a reason.
One thing that I've run into, maybe this is just a question that I've had as time has gone on, but you mentioned, everybody has their bias, but you've also mentioned go to the faithful sources first for information. And so I've thought to myself, well, if critics of the church are biased and, the church official sources are also biased, just in the opposite direction, why should I trust any more in the church's sources than the critic sources? And for me, just my own personal experience, what I've noticed, one of the things I've noticed is that the church is under a lot of scrutiny. When they publish something, there are eyes on it, and if something is wrong, they get lambasted.
Yeah, they do.
On the other hand, if a critic says something and it is wrong,
Nobody cares.
who holds them accountable? Like I feel like there's a lot more wiggle room for critics to say things that are inaccurate. And this is obviously a broad generalization. Not all critics are,
Right.
like this, but I feel like I feel like in general, critics get away with a lot more and feel a lot
Absolutely.
more freedom in how they represent things than church official sources do. And for that reason, even though both ends are biased to a degree, I put a lot more weight and stock in those faithful church sources.
Yeah, me too. The other thing that I do to help weigh sources is I pray.
There you go.
Because like every time I dive into a subject, I pray about it first. And I ask Heavenly Father to help me find good sources. I ask him to help me understand because I mean, the context behind everything is so important. And it helps you understand why people did what they did and why they said what they said. And it makes a lot of those controversial things less controversial when you can put it in context. And so I pray to understand that context so that I understand where they were coming from. And I pray, like if I can't find what I'm looking for, I will pray for that. And 9 times out of 10, Heavenly Father sends me right to what I'm looking for.
On top of that, I think that we need to remember that one of those tools in our toolbox is also other people.
Yes.
Not just, what has been published, but living experts, right? And scholars. I have many times turned to Latter-day Saint scholars for help on certain topics because again, I'm not a credentialed scholar. So like we did an episode on the priesthood ban a couple of years ago. Um, and that is, way above my pay grade, so to speak. Like there's a
But
lot more there than I'm able to swallow as far as
yeah,
information goes. And so I turned to Paul Reeve, who's, helped write the gospel topics essay on that subject. And he helped me through a lot of things, helped me digest a lot of the information. Um, and in my experience, Latter-day Saint scholars have just been so kind and
yes.
open and generous with their time and their resources, for me and for other people that have had questions. So if you have a question out there, um, find the BYU professor who's going to have the answer, who's going to know more about it, and try to figure out how to make contact with them. Find them on social media, look up their email address on BYU's website. I've had a lot of really positive experiences in that regard.
Me too. And actually, some of those scholars are now good friends of mine
Yeah.
that I've reached out to. And like, I emailed Richard Bishman one day out of the blue, and he answered me within like 2 hours.
Wow.
And, I've reached out to Regine Caruth and Dan Peterson and Stephen Harper and Mark Ashers McGee and Garrett Dirk. Like, I talked to all these people, and now like I count them, a lot of them as good friends.
Yeah.
And I think I met both you and Robert on social media first before we ever met in person. So, that's
There's a
that's the way to
community.
do it. Yeah, yeah.
There's a
And
whole community here that are just waiting with open arms for you and your questions. And we
yeah,
love that kind of stuff. We live and breathe those questions.
I know we are all massive geeks,
Yes.
and everybody is very supportive and happy to share what they know and happy to point you to other sources you can find. And like everybody is very supportive in this larger community.
Yeah. One thing that helped me also as I was kind of thrown into the fire was, and this has taken me a long time to realize, but understanding what the learning process looks like, and understanding that learning oftentimes requires a lot of unlearning as well and refining. So it's been important for me to be somewhat flexible in my views, because you find that a lot of things, maybe are not based on research per se. Maybe it's just based on tradition. Maybe
Mhm.
maybe there are perspectives that have been handed down from generation to generation that you just take for granted. Um, and then you find out, oh, hey, there's something here in the historical record that pretty strongly contradicts this tradition. Let's
Yep.
look into it. And being secure enough in your faith to be able to say, I might need to tweak my perspective here on this. The classic example is just, growing up thinking prophets are infallible and perfect, right? Like,
Right.
you need to be open enough to maybe revisit that paradigm and be willing to shift it if necessary, which, yes, it is necessary in that case. But
Yeah,
um
no, absolutely. I always tell people to question your assumptions.
mhm.
And my favorite way of teaching that is this example. Um, so in the scriptures, when you picture Nephi, he's like this tall, broad-shouldered, big guy, it's the Arnold Freeberg paintings,
Yeah.
that we all know. In reality, in 600 BC, the average height of an Israeli man is 5 feet tall. So
Mm,
Nephi would have been large in stature at like 5'4", 5'5". And that's not what you picture when you think of Nephi, right?
yeah.
But that's the physical reality.
Yeah.
So
I did an article I wrote for a website. It was originally called Mormon Hub, and then it was changed to Third Hour, which is what it is today. I
yes,
wrote articles for them a while back, and I did one where I photoshopped many of the Arnold Freeberg paintings so they weren't so like beefy.
yeah,
And I got a lot of flack for it. People were just like, no,
wow,
that's probably they were very physical people. That's probably how they actually looked. And I was like, probably
no,
not. Probably
no,
not. And he, everybody knows that Freeburg was saying this is kind of a representation of how they were spiritually, right?
Right,
Um,
they
but they
were
have this picture.
malnourished. Like they grew up in a time without proper nutrition, they didn't know
Yeah,
what was healthy and what wasn't. Like
we
they were
just need to
not.
be we need to be self-aware enough to understand where we're making assumptions.
Mhm.
And the same thing with the Abinadi picture. I think that's
Oh
also
yeah,
by Freeburg, but it's like whenever somebody mentions Abinadi, you think of an older, white guy with his shirt off that's still
yeah,
jacked
yeah.
out of his mind.
I know. Still, yeah, he's got like Liam Hemsworth arms, Chris Hemsworth
Yeah.
arms. Like
But
come
then you read
on.
the scriptures and you're like, okay, well, none of that is actually found. None of those
Yeah,
details are in the scriptures. And so there are a lot of things like that. And I don't think that, I don't think Arnold Freeberg was trying to deceive people, right?
no, of
It's
course
just
not.
how traditions work, and we need to just be self-aware. One resource that has been very helpful to me is also the Faith is Not Blind book and the pattern set out. Gosh,
Bruce and Marie Hafen.
Bruce and Marie Hafen,
Yeah,
thank you. And they kind of talk about that process of learning and unlearning. They talk about moving from simplicity to the complexity
yeah.
stage to the simplicity beyond complexity stage. And that's been personally really helpful because I've been able to kind of contextualize complexity, or when I don't understand something, instead of freaking out and panicking, I can go, okay, I'm in the complexity stage right now,
Mhm.
and that could be okay. There could be stage 3 after this, simplicity beyond complexity. And in every case, with church topics, I feel like that has been the case, obviously, because I'm still here in the church.
Right.
That doesn't mean that every question is answered or that I don't have any more questions. Um,
I have
but
tons of questions.
yeah, yeah, but you come to a place where you know what the questions are and you've made progress on some of them,
Mhm.
you've answered some of them, and some of them you've kind of come to terms with and you're willing to wait and see.
Mhm. Yeah, absolutely. And um, speaking of, that's another fantastic source is the Gospel Topics essays.
Hmm.
I know a lot of people, that was their first introduction to a lot of these more difficult issues. And that kind of surprises me because I didn't really think anything in them was new or groundbreaking when I read them. But I know that a lot of people really struggled with them.
Yep, that's true. Robert, are we talking your ear off? Is this what
Oh
you
no no no
wanted? Do you have
yeah this
anything to
this is
add?
Yeah,
this is exactly what I wanted, but like
okay.
one or two people did like submit a question, like I think it's
Oh,
kind of
sure.
good. Jerome asks, advice on how to help people tell the difference between good and bad apologetic arguments, because I think that's good, because like unfortunately there are like some really bad arguments out there.
Oh, there's some terrible
And
ones.
so how do you discern, like, say, is this an apologetic argument that actually works and does not work? So have you ever experienced like research like a popular claim that turns out to be very errant? What are your advice on, like, say, how to like sift the good apologetic arguments from the weak or bad apologetic arguments?
For me, I try to poke holes in it. I find that helps because it helps me kind of think about how I feel about things and stuff. And if I can find a bunch of holes in that and go, really, that doesn't really work. Um, so that's the way that I start to approach it. Um, really, you gotta test it out and and kind of like walk through and figure out all the implications of it and see how other people react to it and see how you feel about it personally, because there are absolutely some real bad ones out there. And a lot of it is faulty scholarship. So I always tell people to look at the footnotes. If somebody has a quote and there are ellipses in that quote, look and see what they cut out of it, because 9 times out of 10, that completely changes what the quote said. Especially when it is coming from critics, because they love to cut out relevant stuff right out of the middle of all kinds of quotes. And I would say really, you just have to bounce it off people that you trust and see how other normal people are going to react to it and see if they think it's valuable or not.
For me, sorry, did I cut you off?
Oh no, I was about to say and David, so that's fine.
Yeah. So when I see, and this is something that I've learned through trial and error, when I see kind of an apologetic argument, it's good to take it as a starting point and not an ending point. And take it and then say, okay, let me see if my own research confirms this or casts doubt on this. And as I've done that, there have been some arguments where I'm like, okay, this one isn't great. This isn't holding much water. And sorry, other arguments where it pans out. And lots of times that's the case. It pans out and it makes a lot of sense. And it's okay. This is great. But for me, I'll kind of take the argument, break it down, look at the footnotes, see what other sources are out there that maybe aren't in the footnotes. So I'll scan all those sources that Sarah mentioned. Another great source is the Church History Catalog.
Yes.
Nobody knows about it.
I know. I use it all the time.
It's so valuable. There are so many digitized original sources there. It's fantastic.
JosephSmithPapers.org as well.
There you go. Yep. Perfect. Wilford Woodruff Papers as well.
Yeah.
Yes.
Yeah. There's some great things. So I'll research it. And ultimately, I ask myself, does this make sense to me? Am I at peace with this response? Because if it makes sense with me and I'm okay with it, if it makes sense in my heart and in my mind, then I'll usually run with it and it's usually fine. Every once in a while, somebody might come out of left field with a source that I've never seen before that needs to be taken into account and used to refine kind of how we talk about a certain topic. And that's fine. That's just the learning process again. But yeah, I think a lot of it comes down to doing the work yourself to verify what's being said.
Yeah, and I know everybody's busy. Nobody has time to do all of that stuff. Like even you and me, like we get paid to do this and we still don't have time to do it half the time.
Yeah.
But I think it's also helpful if you just pick like one or two topics and really dive in and learn those two topics really well, then you'll at least have a starting point. And you can go around and refute anybody criticizing those two things, and you can be really solid at it. And that definitely helps, is to have a couple of issues, because all of us, we all have topics that we are more versed on than others.
Yeah, that's great advice. Just to get experience in like what it's like to research a topic. I don't think either of us are saying, go write a dissertation on something, but like pick like the translation of the Book of Mormon and then just absorb everything you can about it, or pick, the Kirtland era of the church and just dive into it, read some books on it, and just kind of get a feel for what it's like to get into the primary sources and the feel of coming to your own conclusions about things and making your own connections, as opposed to kind of being told what the connections are. Getting in there and discovering them for yourself is a great way to build confidence in yourself as a researcher.
Yeah, and don't ever take just one book or one article and think that covers it, because it won't.
Yeah.
Like, I mean, you're going to need dozens, probably, at a minimum for some of these larger topics. And even smaller topics, you're going to need 3 or 4 or 5 sources at least. And I feel it's helpful as well to take sources from different perspectives so that you can kind of get it from all angles, and that really helps you digest it and figure things out for yourself.
Great question from whoever submitted that, Robert.
No, that's good. And we do have one other question. I think it's kind of important because, like, unfortunately, there still seems to be like It's not as bad as it was a few decades ago, but still like a very anti-intellectualism at times in the church. So like one of the questions is like, how do you approach people who are very skeptical of scholarship and intellectuals in the church?
I think that's kind of silly because even the prophets and apostles rely on experts all the time to help form their opinions and help figure, like, it's a jumping off point. And, the glory of God is intelligence, and we're all supposed to study out of the best books, and we're supposed to learn all that we can in this life. And I think, yeah, it drives me nuts when people are just disregard all of that, because the spirit speaks through your heart and your mind, and we kind of tend to forget the mind part and just rely on the feelings a lot of times. But for me, like, especially, that's how answers to my prayers come 99% of the time, is through thoughts and inspiration and not through feelings for me. So I think we really need, just drives me nuts when people just disregard experts, and when they think that they don't need to study, and they think they don't need to learn anything, and they think that it's a waste of time, because what happens when you come across something you didn't know and it throws you for a loop, or like children. Like David, David, you're the only one of us who has kids. So what would happen if one of your kids came to you one day and was like, oh, I read all this stuff and I have no idea what I'm doing, and you didn't know what they were talking, like, you didn't know any of this stuff. You didn't know how to research it, and you'd spent the past 20 years saying, oh, who cares? All that stuff's extraneous, you don't need any of that. It's just a waste of time.
Yeah.
Like, what do you do then?
Yeah, that's a scary situation. Um, I think that when we talk about kind of scholarship and intellectualism, people take things to extremes and maybe put words into people's mouths that they're not actually saying or not advocating for. For instance, and I wonder if this comment was based on a video we just posted a couple days ago on Keystone
With Ben.
with Ben Spackman, Dr. Ben Spackman.
I know.
By the way, that was a great interview. So
Thank you. Thank you.
Yeah, both of them were great.
It was, but that latest interview with him was about kind of the church's relationship with scholarship, and using kind of past data and present data to kind of project kind of where the church is headed, not with like specifics per se, but a lot of the comments in that video are very like, the sense that I got from a lot of the comments has been, oh, so we should just throw revelation and God out the door and just replace that with scholarship. And it's like, no,
they go hand in hand.
Not at all. They go hand in hand. And so many people were like, oh, scholars get things wrong too. Prophets are fallible, but scholars are too. And it's like, yes, of course they are. And so I think that some people get defensive and just jump to extremes, like, oh, you're promoting scholarship. That means that you don't think the prophet can just receive, revelation straight from God. Well, no, that's not what I'm saying. Joseph Smith is an example of
I know, I was going to say, even Joseph Smith studied Hebrew and Greek and all the.
Yeah. And on other times he had a question and he prayed, and God appeared to him and told him, gave him information. And so it can happen both ways. But even Joseph Smith, if I recall correctly, I don't remember the citation, but he talks about revelation and says that it's kind of strokes of intelligence, right? And so it doesn't have to be this totally unique, supernatural, indescribable event. Truth, all truth is from God. And we get a whole lot of truth from the best books, as our scriptures teach. That doesn't mean that the best books don't have flaws in them. Even the Book of Mormon says, hey, if there are mistakes, they are the mistakes of men. Like, yes, fallibility is everywhere. We've got to deal with it no matter what, corner of the spectrum you're looking at. But all things in moderation, like I feel like there's a happy medium in there where seeking divine revelation straight from God is applicable, and seeking knowledge out of the best books is applicable. And the Lord tells us in our mind and in our heart what truth is. So I think that when we're talking about scholarship, we're not at all trying to discount the value of, revelation. But I also think that scholarship and revelation are not mutually exclusive things, and we need to be wary of talking about them as if they are.
Absolutely. And even Joseph Smith, before he had his first vision, he talked to ministers, he attended different churches, he went to camp meetings, he read his scriptures. And at that point, when he still didn't have an answer, then he went and prayed in the grove. He put in the work first. He studied and he couldn't find an answer. So
and I don't want that to sound like we're establishing like a pecking order.
No.
Like you go to the scholarship first, and then if what God reveals to you squares with the scholarship, then you're okay to believe God. Like that's not at all what we're trying to say.
No. Well, like I said earlier, I pray first and then I do it.
Yeah. Yeah. It's an important question though, and
yeah, absolutely.
There's a lot to unpack there, but I think that the messages both are really important. I don't think that God has a problem with scholarship. Quite the opposite. He tells us to go seek it out. But yes, be careful. Vet things there as well in scholarship, because people can be wrong, and that's just the nature of the beast. I think when it comes to mortality, people can be wrong.
But one should not actually have this kind of false dichotomy. It's either scholarship, or revelation. I think it was like the late Elder Ballard who kind of once in the talk said like, how he and other leaders like inquire about like scholars and so forth. Like if you, off the top of my head, like if you read Christ in the New Coffin by Jeffrey R. Holland, which is a very good book on the Christology, the theology of Christ in the Book of Mormon, he quotes a lot of scholarship as well. And even Bruce McConkie was pretty black and white conservative. He would quote like 19th, early 20th century non-LDS scholarship to support his point of view and his works on Christ. And, so it's not exactly dichotomous even in the LDS intellectual tradition. So,
yep. The scholarship is just another tool in our toolbox to help us get to more truth and help us get closer to Christ.
Bingo. Okay, so you guys were like having a conversation, like is there because like in the remaining couple of minutes, like do you have like any other tips or helps you would recommend? You kind of mentioned like JSTOR, archive.org, various websites, and which for the most part are like free. So like the church history catalog, even if they don't have a document, they're pretty good at like scanning it if when needed as well on the Ask Me button. But any other resources or like any other tips you would give, like say, to anyone who listens to this podcast, that you may have had to learn the hard way, or because I do like the fact, like David, you kind of mentioned, like say, you're in community, you're not just one person on the island, and no one has expertise in everything, although you should have like a general knowledge of stuff, like you'll never be an expert in absolutely everything. So like you have to like rely on the community, if you will, as well. So like any other tips before we end this podcast?
I think, go ahead, Sarah.
No, you first.
Well, I was just going to say, if you're not an expert, know who the experts are and have their material close at hand, as close as you can. As far as other resources go, your public library. I know that's like so 1990s of me to bring up, but your public library, because a lot of these resources are going to be, that we've mentioned that are online, are going to be articles. As far as like full-blown books go, you've got archive.org. Not everything is on archive.org though. Check out your public library and see if what you're looking for is there. See if they have a little section on Latter-day Saint history, and see what they've got in that section.
Yeah, and if you're in Utah, it's going to be a very large section. That's where I actually did a lot of my initial research, because I was born before the internet existed.
Yeah, and hey, public library makes you feel like a real scholar. I will tell you that. When you're like, I got to track down this source, I'm going to the library, and you're just like, cha-ching. Another great resource, this might be more Utah specific, but the DI. Sarah, you know what I'm talking about.
I do. They have all kinds of books there.
They do. Most of these books on my shelf behind me are the DI. And just go there after a while, once you've been kind of in this world for a while of like kind of researching this kind of stuff, you get a sense of what like what the books are that you need, and go to the DI and you'll find a lot of them. And it's a great way if you're on a very tight budget, which I think all of us are. It's a great way to build kind of your library. um, there's little that gives me more joy than having a question and seeing a citation online and being like, dang, I wish I had access to that book. Oh wait, I do, because I found it at the DI for
Mhm.
$3, and it's a very satisfying occurrence.
It really is. And I personally would not call myself an expert in anything, but I know a little bit about a lot of things. And I think that is a very good way to go about it. Because as long as you have experts at your disposal or you know who the experts are, then you're in good company.
I'm just going to name a few, just if people are looking for specifics,
Yes.
like a few foundational books that you're going to need. One is Investigating the Book of Mormon Witnesses by Richard Lloyd Webber.
Absolute
Um,
classic.
yeah, wait, did I say
Yes.
Richard Lloyd
Anderson.
Anderson?
Yeah.
Yes.
I was thinking Phantom of the Opera guy, musical guy. Yes, Sarah, you've got another one of them.
Yes. Stone Rolling, Richard Fishman.
Rough Stone Rolling. Some of the big issues like Mountain Meadows Massacre, like
Rick Turley.
you're going to want Rick Turley's book, Massacre at Mountain Meadows, and his second volume,
Vengeance is Mine.
Vengeance is Mine. I don't have that one yet. I need to get that one. It's
I'll
not
go
old
to it.
enough to be on the shelves at the DI yet, but
Most of my books are still packed away because I moved recently, but I have a few of the more foundational ones over here, like Opening the Heavens by Jack Welch. That's an
mhm.
important one. Joseph Smith's Polygamy volumes by Brian Hales.
Yep.
If you want Temples of Freemasonry, you're gonna look for Jeff Bradshaw
Mm.
or Matthew B. Brown.
I've got Matt Brown's.
First Vision, you're gonna want Steve Harper. Translation, I would say Garrett Jerkmott is one. Michael McKay.
There's a great newer series through Deseret Book called Let's Talk About.
Yes.
And let's talk about the translation of the Book of Mormon. Let's talk about race in the priesthood. Let's talk about the Book of Abraham. Just get all those. Start building a little collection of those, and they will. They're great. It's the most cutting edge stuff on some of these big topics, and they're very well sourced for if you want to go deeper.
Book of Abraham. You're going to want John Gee, Carrie Muhlstein, Stephen Smoot, and John Thompson. The four of them put together a volume through BYU Studies, which you can read for free on their website, or you can buy a print copy for like $10. And that is a fantastic, it's all the latest up-to-date stuff on Book of Abraham. It's fantastic. And John actually just works right across the hall over there, and he is fantastic, John Thompson. So I fully endorse that book.
Trying to think of what else we should recommend.
Well, you guys get like when it comes to say the New World, Brant Garner and the late John Sorensen.
Yes, Brant, for sure.
And when it comes to the new old world stuff, like Neil Rapley has done a lot of good work. Warren Aston, Stephen Ricks, the late Sean Tretness, and others have done pretty good work on the Book of Mormon as well.
Yes, absolutely. Matt Roper on anachronisms. He is the name you're going to want to look for that.
Religion of a Different Color by Paul Reeve is a great one on race issues.
Yeah. Fascinating book.
You can still hear me, but I need to replace the battery on my camera because it died.
Okay, I was wondering why you froze. Jack Welch is great on chiasmus and legal issues. So you come across things like Joseph Smith's court cases. He would probably be someone that you were going to want to listen to. President Oakes has done a lot on the Nauvoo Expositor.
Here we go. I'm back.
There you are. Hey.
Yeah, President Oakes, Carthage conspiracy, right?
Yes, yeah, and he's got a paper in the Utah Law Review, which is fantastic, and you can also find it in a book edited by Jack Welch on the Book of Mormon Central, Scripture Central Archive. Craig Foster, another one for polygamy and like fundamentalism.
We could nerd out about this for a long time.
Forever.
I think it's fair to say like we're all into this topic, so yeah, we could like spend 50 hours just like doing book recommendations. It's a bit off topic, but I was asked like to give a list of 50 books, and I shared a document with friends, and it ended up like say 750 texts. It's like even in this won't scratch the surface for some people, but yeah. Yeah,
we could literally go on for an hour just listing our favorite books.
Yeah, but I think it's fair to say like I'm not saying it's impossible, but it's very rare for like say a particular topic to be like comes out of nowhere. Not like say every argument is like recycled, but at the same time, like it's gonna be very difficult to come across like a topic you've never heard of that no one else has even addressed, and so there are resources like out there. You just have to be vigilant in like trying to track them down, and sometimes it might take time, but they're there.
And I would say that if something does come out of nowhere, that's like in 18 whatever, this guy, this prophet did this, and nobody has talked about it, that should be the biggest red flag in your mind. Because if nobody is talking about it, it's probably not true. Yeah, there's probably a reason. I have experienced that. There was a claim not long ago that I found that was Brigham Young put shards of glass in sacks of flour and then gave them to Native Americans.
I know, and I had to research that too. I was like, what?
It came like, it was so out of left field, and I was like, no like major critics are talking about this, and all I could find was an obscure like Reddit post about it, where people are just angry. But
like I said, it's a dumpster fire.
Yeah, but that's one where you're like, okay, here's this claim. There's not very much on it. There's probably a reason for that. Like, let's take a second and think this through. On the one hand, nobody just sits down and eats a bowl of flour. Like you knead it into dough. So the worst that plan is going to do is cut up a few hands. Like nobody's like, it's a waste of flour, like to do that. Like you're not even accomplishing your horrible motivation if that's what you're trying to do. But then, diving into the sources and where the claims are coming from, we did a video on it on Keystone, and you can watch it and find out all about it. But like, yeah, and it's completely, it's just
nonsense.
It's a family folktale that has been passed down. But yeah, if there's nothing on it, like, don't freak out. It's probably just not true.
Yeah, and another thing, if somebody is quoting and it's from the Journal of Discourses, go to the Church History Catalog and look up Pittman's shorthand transcripts. They have an entire section called Parallel Column Comparisons, where they have the original shorthand transcripts versus what ended up in the Journal of Discourses, and they are always very different from one another. So check the actual original source before you take it at face value, because a lot of times that was the recorder changing it up and putting it into his own words and his own thoughts, and often removing large chunks or adding in large chunks of text that was not part of the original sermon.
And on YouTube, Jean Carruth actually has some like fair conference talks addressing this as well. So.
Yes, she does. And she also wrote an excellent paper with Garrett Dirkmott about that.
They did history different back then.
Yes, they did.
And we don't think about that sometimes. It's like in history of the church, Joseph Smith in first person said that this thing happened. And if you take that for granted, that might be problematic. But then you look back and you're like, this isn't in Joseph Smith's handwriting. This is in the handwriting of, James Mulholland or whoever. And it's just they didn't have the same historical standards back then that we do today.
No, they did not. And some of their standards are like appalling and shocking by today's standards, but that's just the way that it was. So.
Okay, well, we're coming near the end of the podcast. I'm guessing that may have been your wife asking when you're about to end there, David. But
we got about 10 minutes.
Oh no, that's fine. So like before we end, like say any other things you would like to share, and like again, any projects you guys hope to be working on in your future, anything that you're hoping to delve into that we should be on the outlook for, and so forth. So.
Well, for work, we will eventually have an app out that I am helping write content for, but it is nowhere near ready. Aside from that, just the conference this weekend, those are my main things coming up.
For me, it's always a surprise. For myself, even what the next video topic is going to be on. But I just like today finished writing an episode on, it's kind of going to be, I don't know when, I guess this is live streamed. It's out right now, but around Halloween, we're hoping to, I want to publish a video about Ella Jensen, who was this young woman in like 1891 who died and then came back, and with quite the story to tell. And the sources are just like shockingly good. Like usually I'm like, okay, this sounds like a faith promoting rumor type thing, but the sources are actually pretty good. But anyway, so I've been working on that, and
interesting.
But after that, I don't know. We'll see.
Second season of my podcast for Fair, the Me, Myself, and I should be coming out in the next couple of months. We've filmed about half of it, but it's all in the editing stages right now. So who knows when it'll come out.
Oh, no, that's good. So we might as well like end here. I think like we've covered like a lot of good ground, and hopefully this will be like very informative for those who maybe wonder like how to start engaging in research and so forth. So I think it's been pretty useful. But Sarah and David, really do appreciate you guys coming on and taking some time out of your busy schedule to do this. So much appreciated.
My pleasure. Thanks for having us.
Of course, it's been great.
Yeah. So thanks for everyone who tuned into the live stream, and hopefully when you catch the when it's posted elsewhere, it will be also informative. So thanks for tuning in, and have a great day. Okay, well.